guys, so in this video I wanted to discuss passing chords, essentially what they are, what chords to use, how to use them, why we use them, and then I'll give you a few examples. So firstly, a passing chord, as the name implies, is a chord that you pass through. It's a chord that is used to connect two other chords in a chord progression. Now that may sound a bit confusing, but as I go through a few examples in this video, you'll sort of understand what I mean by that. Now let's say we have a really simple melody like this. Now, nice and simple in the key of C major. Now, chords in a chord progression are designed to sort of complement the melody or harmonize the melody. Now, if you've seen my video on guide tones, you'll know that generally it's the third and the seventh that are the most important notes in a chord, and the notes that the melody generally uses. So if we start on the E, a good chord to complement that note would be the C major 7, because it's the third of the chord. So we go. Then we move to the F, which means generally in the chord progression, you'd expect it to go something like to a D minor 7, so that the F is again the third of the chord. And then maybe back to C. So it'll sound something like. So that would be a really, really simple chord progression where the chords harmonically supplement or complement the melody by sort of following the guide tones. And now if you don't understand what guide tones are, do go have a look at my video on guide tones, because I sort of go into a bit of depth explaining why they work, how they work, and they're quite important in this context. So that would be your basic melody and your basic chord progression. Now the reason you would put in passing chords is to make the chord progression a little bit more interesting, because this really is quite boring. Right, nothing's really happening. So instead you can put in a passing chord that's, again, can be diatonic or non-diatonic, and so you can make it sound something like this. Right, so already that's a little bit more interesting. There are a few more chords going on, and because not all of them necessarily perfectly fit the melody that you're playing, harmonically speaking, it makes it a bit more dissonant, it may be a bit more sort of interesting. And that's what I mean when I say a passing chord is designed to connect two chords in a chord progression. So it's a chord that you pass through. On the way from C major 7 to D minor 7, we pass through. In that case, I played the C sharp diminished. So you have the chord progression, a passing chord, back to the chord progression. Generally, when you're looking at sheet music, you won't see that passing chord in there. It'll just give you the melody and the basic chord progression, the C going to the D minor. And if you wanted to add in a passing chord, that's up to you. That you have to do that off your own initiative. You can put in your own passing chord that you pass through on the way to the next chord in the chord progression that's written out in the sheet music. And as I said, the reason they're put in is because it gives the chord progression and the whole song a bit more movement, and it just makes it a bit more interesting and harmonically complex. So I suppose another way to think about passing chords is a chord that is not necessary for the melody. Now let's go through a few examples of the types of chords you can use as passing chords. Now let's keep that same really basic chord progression of just the C major 7 going to the D minor 7, and then we'll stop there. So we're going to put in passing chords to get us from the C major 7 to the D minor 7. Now the first one we're going to do is using a tritone substitution as a passing chord. Now you can tritone substitute either the chord you're leaving or the chord you're going to. So from the C major 7, the tritone substitute for that would be G flat. Let's just play G flat 7 for the moment. So you can use that as a substitute. So then it'll sound something like this. Right, so that was tritone substituting the chord that we're leaving, or the C major 7. You can use the same idea and tritone substitute the chord you're going to, or the D minor 7. So in that case, it would be A flat 7. So you could do used as another passing chord. Now, next, you can also use diatonic chords. So we're in the key of C major, and that means you can use other chords in the C of C major to get you to the D minor. So, for example, E minor is in the key of C major, so we can use that as a passing chord. So it'll be something like... Right, so that's another idea. Now the next one I'm going to show you is called an approach chord, which is a specific type of passing chord, and it means just a chord where the root note is one semitone away from the chord that you're going to. So if we're going to the D minor, it means playing a chord that has a root note either as a D flat or a D sharp. So for example, you could do C major to C sharp 7, which the C sharp or the D flat is one semitone away from the D, which makes it an approach chord, and then to the D. So it would be... And similarly, you can do a semitone the other way. So you could go C major 7 to D sharp or E flat 7 down to the D minor 7. I was using 7 chords as approach chords in that case, but you can use major chords or minor chords as approach chords as well. It's up to you. I just happen to use dominant in this example. Now, the next one I'm going to show you is using diminished as passing chords. So you could do something like... the same type of idea as the approach chord idea. We've got the C major 7, then I played a C sharp full diminished. Now that works because it's kind of like a C7, which itself is kind of like a C major 7. So it's a very, very loosely related substitute chord. And then it's also one semitone away, so it sounds good when you go to the D minor. You can do the same way the other way, playing a D sharp full diminished, coming down to the D minor. Right, so that's another variable of the approach chord, but just using diminished instead of majors or minors or dominants. Now, the next one I'm going to show you is using a dominant moving to the minor, which works well as well. So you'd play C major 7 to D7, to the D minor 7. So your passing chord would be the D dominant 7. So that works as well. Now the next chord that you can use as a passing chord is the secondary 5, which means the 5 from the point of view of the chord you're going to, of the D minor 7 in this case, which would be A7. So you could do C major 7 to A7 to D minor 7. Now instead of just the secondary 5 by itself, you can put in a secondary 2-5. So E minor 7 going to the A7 going to the D minor 7. So in that case you have 2 passing chords that get you to the D minor 7. So it would go something like... Right, so you can use all of those ideas as passing chords to get you to the next chord. And the reason they work is because they kind of imply that you're going to the next chord, the D minor 7 in this case. Like if you move chromatically from the C to the C sharp, that is almost implying another chromatic step up to the D. In the same way that the 2-5, which follows the cycle of fifths, which if you don't know what that is, go have a look at my video on the cycle of fifths. Because it follows a 2-5, the cycle of fifths, it also kind of implies that we're going to the D minor 7. So passing chords are chords that you pass through that aren't written into the chord progression, that kind of imply the next chord or sort of direct you gradually to the next chord or the next chord in the chord progression where you want to be. Now, I said earlier that passing chords are used to make a song or a chord progression a bit more interesting and a bit more harmonically complex. Now, to give you an example of that, I'm going to use the song All of Me, which is a good song because the chord changes only every 2 bars, and I'll write the chord progression up in the picture-in-picture just here. So first I'll play you All of Me, just the first part, part A, using the regular chord progression and nothing else. Nothing fancy, no passing chords, just the basic chord progression. So you see what it sounds like. So it'll go like this. So that's part A of All of Me. And as you see, the chords, they all fit nicely, they complement the melody, everything sounds really sweet and lovely, but it sounds a little bit plain and I suppose a little bit boring. Now, next I'm going to play that same melody, All of Me, again, but I'm going to put in passing chords just before I change to each new chord. And you'll hear that it makes the whole song sound a bit more interesting and a bit more complex. So now it'll go like this. So I played a passing chord before every chord change in that chord progression, and I essentially made up the passing chords that I use. If you were to have a look at the sheet music for All of Me, you wouldn't see any of those passing notes in the sheet music. You'd just see the C major going to the E7. You wouldn't see what I did, C major with a quick passing chord of D minor 7 going to the E7. Now in that case I used a really sort of simple formulaic approach in that half a bar before a chord change I played a passing chord. So I went half a bar before the chord change, I played a passing chord, then on beat 1 of the next bar I hit the next chord in the chord progression. Now that's quite, like it works, it was effective, and I played a little 2/5 as well. Using the same idea, but it is quite formulaic and you don't have to play it in like such a formulaic way. It's a good way to start practicing passing chords, sort of putting in the passing chord just before you get to the next bar where the chord changes. But of course it's not the only way. You can essentially put in passing chords wherever you like. And if you take it to the extreme, you can sort of put in a passing chord every beat or every 2 beats. Like, for example, I can play something like this. So that time I played a passing chord every half bar. Now that was ridiculous and didn't sound especially pleasant, and you probably wouldn't do that if you were playing in a band or performing for an audience. But that was supposed to give you some ideas about how passing chords are and can be used. There's no really formula to it. You can put in as many passing chords as you want. You don't have to stick to one. You don't have to put it in any particular place in the bar. You can just throw it around wherever you like. You can play any kinds of passing chords, all kinds of passing chords. You can make it as simple as or as complex as you like. It's really up to you. They're passing chords. You pass by them. They don't actually matter. They're not important for the melody of the song. They just sort of add a little bit of intrigue or a little bit of color to the chord progression and to the song.